Good evening. I hope that your fast was easy. And Yehafchu Yomim Elu L'Moadim U'L'Simcha, that we should usher in much better times for Klal Yisrael than they've had since the Churban Batei Migdosh, the two Bais Hamikdash. This Shabbos, Parshas Vayeschanan, is really a celebration because it's Chamisha Asar B'Av on Shabbos. And we're going to talk about the rare and remarkable distinction of this week, the Motzoi and the middle half of Tisha B'Av, carrying us into the actual Zman of Geula, which is the essence of Chamisha Asar B'Av. So there's a lot to talk about, Baruch Hashem, and we hope that there will be something that you will find worthy of the time of your listening to the shir. In this week's Sedra, Parshas Vayeschanan, we have Shema Yisrael. The pasuk, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Now, we know that we say that pasuk in Musaf each and every Shabbos and Yom Tiv. How does that happen? Because the diaraisa of saying Shema morning and evening, b'shachbecha u'v'kumecha, that the diaraisa is like today, it's 9:22 in the morning, that if someone wants to get the mitzvah say diaraisa, that they have to say it before the 9:22. And at night, they have to say it before Chatzos, L'Chatchila, which tonight Chatzos is 1:02. But let's say he missed that, he's allowed to do it until the morning, till Alos Shachar, but it's B'di'evid. But the first choice is to do it in the morning in the proper time and in the evening. How did it fall into Musaf on Shabbos? So the Gemara said that there was a Rasha Marusha, a king, and Yazgor was his name, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And he wanted to wipe out as many mitzvahs as he could from the Jewish people. And he felt that a stable for Klal Yisrael was Shema Yisrael. So he forbade any Jew in his country to say Shema Yisrael. Now at home they were able to still say, because it was private, there was no one listening. But when it came to shul, they had to take it out of the davening because he had agents that were listening to the davening, and some of them were Jewish, and they knew if they were saying Shema or not. So they stopped saying it, but they did. The Chachamim didn't want to bring Klal Yisrael to a matzav of forgetting Shema Yisrael. So he said, we're going to put it into Musaf, where they're unsuspecting, and that's where it is. And even though this Rav Ashi, the Gemara says, was very upset with this king, and he davened that a crocodile should appear in his bedroom. Now, he was locked in his bedroom for safety, to protect himself. So when this miraculous thing happened, that suddenly he was there alone, ready to go to bed, and there was a crocodile who ate him up. So it was the end of that takana. But the Chachamim wanted Klal Yisrael to remember the Nes So they left Shema Yisrael in Musaf, and that's why we say it to this very day. Now, that's a pasuk in our Sedra, and there's another pasuk that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, and I've quoted this pasuk to you in the past. I know 2 years ago I said something about it. And that is, Al Tosef Daber Elai Od Badavar Hazeh, which simply means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu begged Moshe Rabbeinu. Voeschanan is the gematria of 515, that he offered 515 tefillas that he should be allowed to go into Eretz Yisrael. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to him, I'm asking you not to offer a 516th tefillah, because if you do, I have to let you come in. Now, that is an eye-opener, because what do you mean HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to do anything that he didn't want to do? And you see from the pasuk that he says, please, don't daven another tefillah. And if he did daven another tefillah, Hashem has to do it. So the insight for us is that we are able, as the Gemara says, that tzaddikim goizrim v'HaKadosh Baruch Hu makayim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu goizer, and tzaddikim are mevatel. That the power of tzaddikim, now when we say tzaddikim, that they're really in olam haba all of their lives. Every bracha they make is l'shem shamayim. The foods they eat is l'shem shamayim. They're living a life attached to the ruchnius of why their neshama came in to be in their bodies, their physical body. The body wants as much of gashmius as it can get. But the neshama wants as much of the ruchnius that it can get. And when it comes to a point where a tzaddik davens or says, no, I don't want this or that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu listens, as the Gemara says. So if Moshe Rabbeinu would indeed have davened for that, with that 516th tefillah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu would have to do it. I mean, the Gemara says it beferish, which shows you an unbelievable thing, because a tzaddik is still a human being. The Zohar HaKadosh says in Parshas Vayechi that when a tzaddik is nifter and he divests himself from the body, then he becomes kula ruchni. But while he's alive, even if he's 99% ruchnias, he's still in a physical body. There's 1% physicality. But while he's in the body still, the Gemara says that if he davens or doesn't want something, he is able. We know that there was a terrible gezerah in Russia, and the Noam Elimelech saw that the Tsar was about to institute a terrible decree against the Jews, and they brought the decree to him, and it had to be signed by the king. And he took out the pen from the inkwell. You know, in those days they had a pen that they had to dip into the ink, and that's how they wrote. And as soon as he touched the ink, it spilled over on top of the paper, and he was the biggest onav, but he gave a clap on the table and he said after the ink spoiled the print, Melech, they called the Noya Melimelech, the Rebbe Reb Melech. Melech is the Melech Iber de ganze Welt. Now he didn't talk like that normally. To make such a statement, you would have thought that he was chas v'sholom, a big shot, or ego, or gaiva. But when it came to saving Klal Yisrael, he gave a clap and announced, this king wants to do something terrible to Klal Yisrael, and I am saying no. And the ink went all over. So they thought it was just a mishap. So it says from the Kadmonim who tell over the story that they took the paper and the scribe immediately started to rewrite, and they cleaned up the mess and they brought it to him a second time. And they brought the ink and he took the pen, the king, to dip it in and to sign, and again it tipped over. And the Rebbe Reb Melech, who was sitting in his house but had the Ruach HaKodesh, so he saw everything going on. And he gave a clap a second time and said, Melech is Melech Iber de ganze Welt, and as Melech zok Nein is Nein. So the king said, I'm not signing this decree. 2 times I should knock over the ink? But the story just brings out that tzaddikim are in the driver's seat, that they supersede what HaKadosh Baruch Hu has said if they want very much to supersede. Nothing can stand in front of them. And I even heard from some tzaddikim, big tzaddikim, like 50 years ago, that they said, believe me, when the Malach HaMaves comes to take our neshamas, believe me, we don't have to do it. We could destroy the Malach HaMaves into a gal shel atzamos, was this tzaddik's statement. But we don't do it because if HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants at that time to take back our neshama, we don't stand in the way. And we do the Ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But if we didn't want it, just like you found by the Asara Aruge Malchus, they were told we're going to kill every one of you, and they did over a 52-year time span. It wasn't that they took out one and killed him, and the next day they took out another. It was 52 years till they killed them. But they answered the Romans and said, give us 3 days and we'll answer you. And Tier Rabbi Yishmael, as we say on Yom Kippur and on Tisha B'Av, we'll let you know whether it's going to happen or not. Now, what would have happened if Rabbi Yishmael went up to Shemayim and he didn't hear in Shemayim that they have to go through with this terrible tragedy? No one would have touched them. They couldn't touch them. Those were Tanoim, the biggest of the big. But in Shemayim they told them that you should go through. And when there was a protest, they called out from Shemayim, if we hear one more word of protest, we're going to turn the world back, like the flood that took place, to water. So the tzaddikim went through it. But that's the power of tzaddik, and that's why Moshe Rabbeinu could have changed, but Hashem asked him, don't offer another tefillah, so he didn't. And that was that. And at the time when I said it to you, I underscored the fact that on the halachos of Tisha B'Av, the Shulchan Aruch said that if somebody gets engaged, they should say Mazel Tov on Tisha B'Av. So the Shulchan Aruch asks, and the Shulchan Aruch says, why? Shema yikadmenu acher. If you don't say as soon as the shidduch happened, Mazel Tov, then somebody could steal away the shidduch. Now we know the Gemara says, Arboim yom koidim yitziras havlad, machrizim bas ploini leploini. So it's called out who's supposed to marry whom 40 days before the child is even conceived. Koidem yitziras havlad. So how could that be that someone could steal away the shidduch? It's called out in that. So the Yerushalmi answers, berachamim. Because somebody could be ready that Rachel is supposed to marry Ruvain. And somebody who wants Rachel starts davening and davening and davening. And berachamim, with that davening, they could steal away the shidduch. That's what the Yerushalmi says. So you see the power of tefillah. That tefillah, a problem with tefillah is it's so big that the Yetzer Hara is given full permission to try to keep the person's mind off of the davening. Because it's so powerful, the Yetzer Hara does not want it to be effective. So we're sitting there davening, and we're given the chance to be together with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If you tell a chassid, what would be if your Rebbe called you in and you spent an hour with him? So the chassid would say, it's like heaven, it's like going into heaven. It's the highest opportunity, the most golden opportunity. But the Yetzer Hara doesn't want that yichud. So he will come and start having you think about this in your business and what you have to do after davening. And by the time davening is over, you hardly had a proper word of kavanah in what you should have been thinking versus what you actually thought. So we see that from that pasuk. Now we know that the Mishnah says, Lo hoyu bi Yisrael yomim tovim kachamisha asr ba'av v'chiyom kippurim. Now you know that an Amora is not allowed to disagree with a Tana. That means if a Tana makes a statement, definitive statement, an Amora can't come and disagree. Tanoim were higher than the Amoroyim. So the Mishnah says, Lo hayu bi Yisrael yomim tovim kachamisha asr ba'av v'chiyom kippurim, and the 15th day of is compared and put on equal plateau with Yom Kippur. And the Gemara says, Bishlom Yom Kippurim, that it's so big and it's of such auspicious importance and celebration, because it was a day that achieved Slicha Mechil and Kapara. But what's this Chamisha Asarot? So the Gemara goes into a long list of things that happened. They finished all the wood for the Kolu Atse HaMaracha, that the wood that they needed for the Mizbeach and for the Mishkan or the Bais HaMikdash, they finished preparing enough for the entire year. So there was a big simcha. Shevet Binyamin, after the story of Pilegesh Begiva, was answered, the Klal Yisrael was answered to marry into them. That there was a story of a young girl that was violated, and they were living with her until she died. And it was a national Klal Yisrael tragedy. So you'll ask, why not just the 10 or whoever violated her? Shouldn't they have been punished? But they did the whole Shevet Binyamin, where they came from. Because the Chazal said that if in a Shevet such an ugly thing could end up happening, the whole Shevet is responsible. That if in a family, like the Gemara says about Bilga, the girl who was so violated all these, did all these Averas, so it was done in front of the father's house that she was judged and punished. So the Gemara says, what does the father have to do with it? So the answer is that if a girl grew up and it's his daughter in his house and should become like this, so the answer is that there was something in that family that was so deficient that could produce such a daughter that the father and the mother are disgraced as part of the punishment. Now over here, the whole Shevet Binyamin for years could not marry anyone in Klal Yisrael, because if somebody in their Shevet could come out of pure desire and do what they did, out. But they came after a lot of regret back into marrying Klal Yisrael. When was that? Chamisha Asar B'Av. Now, we know that that Kolo Meisei Midbar. You know that after the story of the Meraglim, which happened the first year when they left Mitzrayim, they had to dig graves every year and go to sleep in the grave, because the 600,000 that were between men, only men, no women and children, and they had to be between 20 and 60. Someone was 8 years old, was not part of this curse or decree, and someone that was over 60 was not. They had to, it's because they were going to die in the desert. And how did they die? They dug a grave before Chamisha Asar B'Av, because Chamisha Asar B'Av, they saw the large moon. They knew it was the 15th day, and they were told to do it then. And they all slept, all 600,000, in the grave. And the 15,000, because 15,000 times 40 years is 600,000, the 15,000 of that year who was supposed to die didn't wake up in the morning. And the other remaining Klal Yisrael got out of the grave and waited to the next year and again dug the grave and slept in the grave. Now, the last year, with the last 15,000 after 585,000 were in the graves, they didn't die. The last 15,000. So they thought they made a mistake. It wasn't the 15th. So they slept the next night again, and the next night, up until the 15th when they saw the full moon, and they realized they didn't make a mistake. And what happened with those 15,000? Why didn't they die? They were part of the 600,000. So there's a long discussion and debate and different opinions. If they, for a reason, did not die and they ended up going into Eretz Yisrael, or they did die because HaKadosh Baruch Hu said they're going to die. So what happened to them? Why didn't they die on the 15th day? And simply not get up in the morning? But the point being that when they got out of the grave, they danced because they saw that they weren't supposed to die. So that was a simcha of Chamisha Asar B'Av. Now we know that 40 days before a person is conceived, that they call out who they're supposed to marry. Now there's a difference of opinion in the Gemara if the world was created in Tishrei or in Nisan. And there's a long debate between Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Elazar. And Rabbi Yehoshua is of the opinion that the world was created Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which means 7 days, that means Adam Rishon, which means 7 days before Chav Gimel Adar is when Bereshis Bara Elokim actually happened. Now Rabbi Elazar holds no, it was not in Nisan, it was in Tishrei. And that Chav Gimel Elul was the Bereshis Bara, and on Rosh Hashanah, Adam Harishon was born and created. So that's the difference of opinion. And the Arizal and the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, Daf Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, Toises brings Elu ve'elu Divrei Elokim Chaim, both are right. Rebbe Elazar's talking about when the plan, when a person wants to build something, they have architectural plans, but it's not the building yet. So Rabbi Elazar held it was the machshava, the plan for the world, and that when it came Rosh Hashanah Hayom Harayom, the pregnancy, meaning not the actual lady yet. Hayom Haras Olam. And the Arizal says the same thing. It's both Kabbalah and the Gemara agree on this. And Rabbi Elazar is b'machshava, and it was in Tishrei, and Rav Yehoshua was Nisan, and that's the Lemaisa. That's when it actually happened. So says the Arizal, and so says Tosfos at the end of the discussion, that they're both right. One's talking about the planning stage, and one's talking about the actual happening. Now, according to Rabbi Elazar, that Chav Gimel Elul was the beginning of the machshava. What is 40 days before that machshava? It's Chamisha Asar B'Av. And the Mishnah says there were no such days because, like the Arizal says, the whole Tammuz and the whole of are bad. Our mazel was bad. Look what happened to us. Two Batei Migdash destroyed, the Egel, everything that happened in those 6 weeks. But when it comes to Chamisha Asar B'Av, says the Bnei Yissaschar, it's the springboard for us to have Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, the days of Simcha, of Sukkot, and Chanukah. Till we come till Rosh Chodesh Teves, and then again there's 6 weeks of bad mazel, which conclude with Chamisha Asar B'Shvat. So we see it's a day of Chesed and Rachamim. So this Shabbos is not only Parshas Vo'ez Chanan and Shabbos Nachamu, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu calls out to Klal Yisrael, Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami. But we see that it's a day of this Shabbos comes out Chamisha Asar B'Av on Shabbos. So it's an unbelievable opportunity for what can be accomplished on a day of such chesed, that it is the backbone and the root for Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah and for Sukkot and for Hanukkah, that it's able to come to full flourish of all the chesed and all the nisim v'niflaos lemala min hateva. Now, the pasuk in our Seder says, "Re'ei lamadati eschem chukim mishpatim bekerev haaretz." So the Arvei Nochal, one of the biggest Talmidim of the Mizritcher Maggid, asked, why in this pasuk do you have to say bekerev haaretz? Just say ba'aretz. What do you mean bekerev haaretz? So he explains that the Yetzer Hara wants badly to disarm us from being strong and fortified to do the mitzvahs, to learn Torah Lishma. So it settles, it makes a pshara. You know, okay, in the house you've got your children and you have what you've been taught your whole life what a house should be. But when you go out on vacation for 2 weeks, who says you have to, then you're entitled to rest? Do you have to daven with a minyan every single day? I mean, you want to see the beauty of the Grand Canyon, and you want to see this in Yosemite, you want to see it, so you won't daven. You'll miss the 10 or 15 Yeheshmei Rabbas that you hear and the Kedusha, which you say corresponding to the angels in heaven. So you won't do it. You're entitled to rest. You're entitled to catch your breath. And that's where the fight begins. Not so much in the house, but says the Arvei Nochal, bekerev haaretz, when you're out amongst the people on vacation and you are there trying to capture and have as much Yiddishkeit, that's the battleground of the Yetzer Hara, who goes after you to try to strip you of that fortification, and you suddenly have all sorts of rationalizations in your head of why you could or couldn't. Now, I want to tell you that we know that the only day in the year that there's a difference in the day lahalacha is Tisha B'Av. That today, Tisha B'Av, up until Chatzos, you couldn't sit on a chair, you couldn't learn, you couldn't put on talis and tefillin, and suddenly after Mincha you could. And tzaddikim all said that the morning of Tisha B'Av is Golus. The afternoon of Tisha B'Av already begins the process of Geula, leading up to Chamisha Asar B'Av, which, for the reasons that the Gemara lists, put it on the same plateau as Yom Kippur. And it's a Mishnah. This is not some homiletic sermon by some rabbi from his pulpit. We're talking about a Mishnah puts it on the same thing. And that's why tzaddikim had beautiful tishin and celebration of what Chamisha Asar B'Av is. Now, we know that there's a concept of Mashiach ben David and Mashiach ben Yosef. The main one was Mashiach ben David. Now, when Lot with his two daughters finished after the Mabul and they went into the cave, Rashi brings that they thought the whole world was destroyed. So they said to each other, listen, the only one left is our father to enable us to have a child, so we're going to have to live with him. And they meant it L'Shem Shamayim. And one was more edel than the other, and it's from Ammon, instead of saying Moav, Me'av, from my father, saying it openly and publicly, but said, like, masqueraded a little. That's where Mashiach ben David came out from. Now, if I went around to 1,000 Yidden and they didn't know that Parsha, and I asked, who do you think are the ancestry of Mashiach? I don't think one of them would say the Benos Lot in this story that happened in the cave. Because that's Mashiach. But we know the rule that Mashiach ben David is going to come from complete Hesach Hadas. The least expected occurrence or occasion that he should come from, and that should be the actual backbone and realization of Mashiach. Just like Rus gave birth to the ancestry of David, and you wouldn't have thought it came from her till Boaz made the drasha that Ammon v'lo Ammonis, Moav v'lo Moavis, made that drasha. You wouldn't think that. And we know that the Chazal say that Mashiach ben David came from the story of Lot, and Mashiach ben Yosef came from the story of Shechem and Dinah. So say Chazal. So what was that? Because who was Dinah's brother? Dinah's brother was Yosef. And it was Yosef's wife who was the result, Osnas, from the daughter that Shechem had with Dinah. Osnas came out, and her name was Osnas, says the Medrash, because Yaakov Avinu took her and put a kameya around her neck and put her into a sneh, into a bush that he knew the goyim would find her, and that she would at least be safe, because the brothers hated her, that she was the result of what Shechem violated their sister. So he put her into a bush, and that's why her name was Osnas, a loshen of sneh. And when she came down to Mitzrayim, and Yosef saw the kameya, which said, Bas Dinah, Bas Yaakov, he realized that this was his niece, and he married her. That's why he married her. Yosef HaTzadik, the Amud of Tzidkus and Yesod and Kedusha, would never have married a Shiksa. So he married her. Now, the Arizal says that each month is Keneged a different Shevet. Yehuda is Keneged Nisan. And who is Keneged of Shimon. Now Yaakov Avinu was very angry at Shimon, what he and Levi did, that they attacked and at the end in Vayechi, when he gave out brachas, he didn't give any bracha to Shimon and Levi. They did not get any land in Eretz Yisrael. The Levium had Orei Levium, in other words, they had their 42 cities, but they didn't get a chunk of land, and Shimon didn't get. So where did Shimon live in Eretz Yisrael? Shimon lived Yehuda, who was the biggest Shevet and got the biggest chunk of land, says the Medrash and the Gemara, that Yehuda gave a little piece at the end of his chelik to Shimon. And that's where Shimon with his whole Shevet lived. But it wasn't his. It was given as a gift to him by Yehuda because he had Rachmanis on him. Now, the Yesod of Geula is Nisan, Pesach. But the Gemara says that Liyasad Lava, when we have the Geula Shlema, the Nisan v'Niflos will be bigger than what happened in Mitzrayim, but Mitzrayim will always be mentioned because it is the Yesod, it is the foundation of Geula. And that's why we say it every Friday night in Kiddush, Zecher Yitzias Mitzrayim, and we keep talking about Yitzias Mitzrayim, even in Krishma. We don't mention Shmona Esrei, but we do mention Zecher Yitzias Mitzrayim. And we say it in Shema. Now, the fact is that Yehuda realized that the Iker Geula is going to springboard from Tisha B'Av, and that's the month of Shimon. So he therefore, says the Arizal, gave off from his land for Shimon to be able to have the achiza, the attachment with Yehuda, because he was in his land. And from that springboard of Yehuda, of Yitzias Mitzrayim, could come the eventual Geula Shlema of Shimon's month, which is Tisha B'Av, from there. And that's how it comes out, from that specific timing. And that's the reason that we have Kiddush Levana after Tisha B'Av. You know, when you see the Levana after, according to some in Halacha, after the third day, means from the fourth day on, or the Motzoi Shabbos. But let's say Motzoi Shabbos and Ov was Hey or Vav. We're not Machadach Levana, bring many that we wait till Motzoi Tisha B'Av. Why? Because the Levana said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you made me and the sun equally big. You can't have two kings ruling. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, you know, you're right. So I'm going to keep the sun big and you're going to be diminished. But what will happen when Mashiach comes? The moon is going to be once again as big as the sun. So that's why we wait for Motzoi Tisha B'Av, because Tisha B'Av is the Geula Shlema, when the moon is going to return to its original size. So it's very befitting that after having Tisha B'Av, and we went through Mincha time, that we put our talis and tefillin on, and we do this, and we do all of this, that we do at Motzoi. And now, if you look in Tamei Minhagim, you will see that there is a minhag. And I used to do it for years. Unfortunately, I don't know why, but I haven't for a number of years. But what does the Tamei Minhagim say? that on Tisha B'Av there's a minig choshev to go to a cemetery and to bring with you chunks of garlic, shum, and walk into the cemetery and start throwing it all around, left, right, up, down, and walk through the cemetery doing this. What kind of a minig is that, to throw garlic and to go to a cemetery on Tisha B'Av? So the Tamei Minhagim brings the reason, and this is from Kadmoinim, that since on Tisha B'Av, the Hiskalos, in other words, Mashiach is born into every generation, and he wants to desperately reveal himself after Mincha on Tisha B'Av. It's called the Ha'ora of Mashiach. So what's going to happen when Mashiach comes? All those buried in a cemetery are going to have Tchias HaMesim. Some say tzaddikim, some tzaddikim said it's going to be immediate for the tzaddikim, and for the average person it's going to be a few months later, a little bit later, but there's going to be Tchias HaMesim. So on Tisha B'Av, that's the day to be mesugal, of people to get out of the graves and have Tchias HaMesim, to go into the cemetery, because when you take Shum al Pi Kabbalah, and that's why we put it on the tray of a Pidyon Haben, which is the biggest Suda that you can enjoy in Ruchnias, in Olam Hazeh. The old Satmar Rebbe, when he got older and he didn't have the koyach, he didn't go to any chasnas, he didn't go to any brisson, but he had them bring to him a Suda of Pidyon Haben. Because Al Pi Kabbalah, it's Keneged 84 Tanesim, Koichi Voracious Oini of Yaakov Avinu, that he never saw any Pagam Habris in his 84 years, and that the Reuven was born with the first Koichi of Reuven, of Yaakov Avinu. So, and Shum al Pi Kabbalah corresponds to all of that. So we take at a Pidyon Haben, on the tray, if you know, they put sugar and they put garlic, but when they go into a cemetery in Tisha B'Av, as it says from all the Kadmonim, you throw shum all around, because that is part of the process of Tchias HaMesim. And that is why we have the minig on Tisha B'Av of going through a cemetery. Now, since from Dina and Shechem, Mashiach ben Yosef comes out, and that's, I told you a different reason from the Arizal why half of Menashe had to stay out and half of it went in to Eretz Yisrael, but some Mekubalim say that the reason for that is because Menashe was represented Mashiach ben Yosef. That was the children of the child of Yosef and Osnas. And he represented Mashiach ben Yosef, and that's the reason the Mekubalim say Vateitze Dina is Begematria Mashiach ben Yosef. That half of Menashe was for the Golus, and that's why he had to stay out of Eretz Yisrael, and the other half was Geula, and that's why he had to be in Eretz Yisrael, because he was the direct. Now everyone agrees that Mashiach ben Yosef has come. Some said, and they said that he has to be killed. He won't die naturally. So many tzaddikim said that it was Reb Shlomo Karlin who was killed by a Cossack's bullet and was in a coma for 3 years in 1812. And then he died. Some said he was, and others said others were Mashiach ben Yosef. They all agree that Mashiach ben David, which is the main Mashiach, did not come to this world yet. But he will be the one that will be produced and will come forward for the world to be able to have eternity with the goodness, the luster, and the pleasure of existing in a realm of delight that Klal Yisrael suffered for 4,000 years. But when Mashiach will come, it's going to be a different world transposed, and everything good will happen in the world. Now, after Tisha B'Av is always Parshas Vo'eschanan, because the Yesod of Vo'eschanan is Shema Yisrael, which big letters in that pasuk, and the Aseres HaDibros, because the Aseres HaDibros, as Chazal say, was an incorporation of Kol HaTorah Kula, and there can be no greater influence in the bringing of Mashiach than the Koyach and the Schus HaTorah. That Torah in and of itself is able to high the ante of Schusim Lamala. We just have to, before we begin the learning of Torah, we have to push aside the shtusim, and we have to think for a moment, Rabbanu Shalom, I am learning this Torah, that you should have a nachas ruach, that there should be a purity and a tahara that should come forth. And that's also why we go to the cemetery, because with throwing the shum and going in at a time that Mashiach could reveal himself in actuality, that we are being metaher, the aver, we're cleansing. Do you remember on Lag BaOmer we sing Bar Yochai? One of those stanzas says, Tiher es ir Tveria, v'hodu lo min Shemaya, that he went into Tveria and he knocked over all these chitzonim and all of the tumah that was very strong in Tveria, and in Shamayim they proclaimed a thank you to Rav Shimon Bar Yochai that he was able to bring Tveria to a level of purity. And you see that because so many Kedoshim and so many Tzaddikim were buried in Tveria, to be able to uplift the level of Tveria, and Rav Shimon Bar Yochai came and finished the job. And that's what I told you last week about the Noam Elimelech and his brother, Rav Zushia, went into Golus, and all the tzaddikim said as they were going into Golus, they were wiping clean the atmosphere, the air. And the Samach Mem, and this is a Kabbalah from tzaddikim, the Samach Mem, the Yetzer Hara said in Shemayim, he is quitting his job. He's stopping to do his job, to get Yidden to do Averis. Why? Because the Noam Elimelech and Reb Zushia are leveling the battlefield. They're wiping out the Koyach Hara. So the Yetzer Hara said, I'm being given an impossible thing to get the Yidden to do Averis. So because he said that, the Noam Elimelech and Reb Zushia stopped in their Golus and never went out into Golus another day. And it is written that where did they stop and was their final place? Auschwitz. That's where they went up to. And that there was an understanding And if you take the map where they went and they were Matayr, the Enlightenment movement of Haskalah never went there. It was everywhere else where they didn't continue their goals to wipe out the Koyach Hara, to be able to effectuate the downfall and the lessening of Kedusha in a city, with their going there, that the Tumah had to be diminished. But they had to stop because the Yetzer Hara had his job until Mashiach comes of causing Yidden to trip and to end up in trouble with the Averis. The Eibusha should help that when we usher in this Shabbos, Voyaschan, Shabbos Nachamu, that our Klal Yisrael is still suffering terribly, and we should be able to finally see the dancing, the rejoicing of the Nachamu, Nachamu Ami, and that the springboard of Chamisha Asr Ba'av should enlighten and elevate and bring to full koyach and strength, undiluted in its power of Geula for Klal Yisrael.